Hi, welcome to the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory's Next Generation Student Interview Series. I'm Outreach Coordinator Sarah Brzezinski, and today we'll be speaking with Megan, a current graduate student, about what she's researching, how she came to study at the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory, and how she hopes her career will develop. Hi Megan, how are you doing?
Good, thanks, Sarah. How are you?
I'm doing well. Well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Where are you from?
Sure. I grew up in New Jersey, and then ended up going to get my undergrad up in Boston and moved out to Maryland, to the Eastern Shore, actually, for a job, and have been here ever since.
So, what drew you towards working at the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory for your graduate degree?
Yeah, so the job that I had before grad school worked pretty closely with the UMCES program, and I knew that I was looking for a graduate program that looked at the intersection between society and the environment, which is one of the foundations that the MEIS program offers. And my advisor is based out of the Chesapeake Biological Lab, so that's what ended up drawing me directly to that lab.
And who is your advisor? Who are you working with?
Yeah, I work with Dr. Lisa Wanger. She's an economist out at CBL.
And what are you working on with her? What does your thesis research investigate?
So we are studying how stakeholder groups value shallow water systems in Maryland's Chesapeake Bay. And what we're really focusing on is a policy conflict that exists between our recovering SAV beds in the Chesapeake Bay and our expanding oyster aquaculture in the Chesapeake Bay, and trying to facilitate different policy options that might better reflect stakeholder values.
So, Megan, can you tell me a bit about how different stakeholders are using and valuing this shallow water ecosystem within the Chesapeake Bay that you're focusing on?
Sure. So we're focusing on the shallow water part of the bay because it is where we see an abundance of submerged aquatic vegetation, or SAV or seagrass, um, which is an important part of our ecosystems and often used as an indicator that our water quality is improving. It's also the range of habitat where oyster aquaculturists tend to site their leases. And because of these policy conflicts, seagrasses are more highly protected than the oyster leases are. So when seagrass begins to encroach on oyster leases, the aquaculturists have to either move their operation or stop their operations. Um, at the same time, though, these shallow water systems are places where you might go kayaking, or you might go bird watching, or you might go fishing, especially around these kind of complex habitat types like seagrass beds or like aquaculture leases. And those are all use values. You kind of need to be in or around the water in order to appreciate those. But we also have are hoping to represent stakeholders that have non-use values, and those are things like living in a community near the bay, or even just knowing that the Chesapeake Bay is a healthy watershed, a healthy bay, that if you have a family, you can pass that healthy ecosystem on to your children. You just, the warm, fuzzy feeling of knowing that you can walk down the street and watch the sunset if that's something that you want to do. That kind of, some groups call it like a spiritual connection, or a just like sense of peace. So yeah, there are a variety of uses and reasons to focus on the shallow water system in Maryland's Chesapeake Bay, and we're hoping to quantify as many of those as we can.
So, how are you collecting data? Are you working with the different stakeholders?
Yeah, so stakeholder work is pretty unique these days because of COVID. So we will be doing most of this data collection remotely, and it'll involve everything from casual conversations and semi-structured interviews through to questionnaires and likely a virtual workshop.
Wow. So you're trying to get information from all of these diverse stakeholders on their needs and their priorities for this shared resource. What would be the end goal of your research effort?
Yeah, we are aiming to build a hierarchy of policy options that can be presented to policymakers and shallow water managers in order to provide them more information and help fill some data gaps that exist around how these spaces are used and valued and what different outcomes might look like.
So can you tell us a little bit about what a typical day looks like for you as a researcher and as a student?
Sure. Everything is online for me right now, and because of the nature of my research, likely will be for the remainder of my degree. Luckily, UMCES and the MEES program were already Zoom-based learning, so that hasn't been too much of a change on a day-to-day basis for me. And so besides classes, most of my work right now is coordinating. I'm trying to make sure that I have all the right approval to be able to talk to all the different stakeholders that we have, and also make sure that I am including as many voices and as diverse voices as I can in order to truly represent what these ecosystems that I'll be modeling and presenting on, how they are actually valued by the people who interact with them. So lots of internet coordination at this point.
So how do you think your higher education thus far is preparing you for a career that you're interested in pursuing, and what career would that be?
Sure. So, well, just like everyone, I'm learning to be very dynamic and resilient right now, just from the nature of COVID, which is a skill that's definitely important to being a professional. But my research specifically works to catalyze conversations, like I was talking about, especially about policy issues that either policymakers can feel like we don't have enough information on, and we can do our best as researchers to help facilitate that information to be collected and try and fill those gaps, but also to try and create consensus around topics where so many different voices may have opinions about them. And because I would like to be someone who works more directly in a policy management position, I think that those are going to be critical skills for me to have moving forward throughout my career, even if I end up being someone that doesn't work as directly with the public. Just being able to put on all these different hats and talk about the same issue in a way that brings everyone to the table, I think will benefit me long term.
Communication skills are always great to develop for any industry, I think. So can you tell me about what the next steps in your research and education will look like?
Yeah, so my research is still pretty nascent. So the next steps will be actually developing further conversations in order to be able to fill the data gaps that exist. So the first step is talking about how we might, what policy options might look like, but then the next step is, okay, and what does that mean? If we put these policy options in place, what does it potentially look like in the Bay? And that is a much more quantitative and model-based step to the project. And so that's like the big chunk coming up next.
And is there a way that stakeholders who have a value for these resources that you'll be working with could help your study?
Yes, if this sounds like something that you are interested in, um, my email is available on the UMCES website, and I would welcome you to reach out and let me know a little bit about who you are and what you do, and hopefully we can work together.
That sounds great, Megan. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today. It was great getting to know you and to learn a bit about your research.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
All right. Well, thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining us. Have a nice day.